Connie called me. I could tell she was a little bit concerned when I wasn't here yet, but I found it okay. So thanks for guiding me in. It's good to be here. Don't usually use the podium, but they tell me this is where the mouse works. So I'm going to drive the presentation from here. But I welcome everybody. You know, I feel kind of like I'm in front of the firing squad with everybody over here. But feel free to fire away your questions, shout them out, or raise your hand, whatever you're more comfortable with. And what we're going to talk about is just a recap of the legislative session, the good, the bad, what's still on the table for next year, and just handle any questions that or concerns that you have about the past session or going into the short session next year. So first, let me just give you, well, let's see if it does work. There we go. Whoops. There we go. Okay, should I just be pressing the middle button?
Just scroll.
Scroll, okay. So a lot of folks ask me, what's the difference with the North Carolina Chamber, and are you affiliated with the local chamber? Are you affiliated with the U.S. Chamber? We all kind of share the same brand, but we're all autonomous at the same time. We work together on similar goals, but we're separate organizations. So this slide gives you an idea of how the North Carolina Chamber is set up and what our mission is and what we're setting out to do. This is a flow chart of how ideas turn into bills and solutions that the state legislature passes. It starts with the Chamber Foundation. Vision 2030, I was just talking to John before the meeting about the 4 pillars, and we're going to go into that in a second. But Vision 2030 is a long-term strategic plan for the state to make the state the #1 place in America for economic growth and jobs. Obviously, we have a long way to go. We have the 3rd highest unemployment rate in the country right now. But the goal is, over time, to plan by 2030 to be the best state in America for jobs. By 2030, over the next 20 years, there's going to be 2 to 3 million more people moving to the state. And we're likely to be the 7th largest state in America by 2030. Larger than Ohio, larger than Georgia, larger than Michigan, almost as large as Pennsylvania. So there's a lot of growth happening in North Carolina. And Vision 2030, the Chamber Foundation, the goal there is to plan for that future and to be prepared. So how do those long, forward-looking ideas turn into bills that get passed? Well, you can see the gears. These are kind of the gears of the mothership of the chamber. There's different ones, different parts of the organization that work together. The one that you probably think of first is this big wheel here of lobbying and advocacy. That's what most people think of with the state chamber. We have a lobbying team that's down at the General Assembly every day, talking to legislators and trying to push business-friendly bills. But we also have, underneath that umbrella of the state chamber, the Chamber Federation, which is a network of the state chamber and local chambers across the state. There's 85 local chambers that are members, including Wilmington. And so members of the Wilmington Chamber with 10 employees or fewer are automatically members of the state chamber as well. So we share these joint members. As soon as they sign up and pay their membership dues at the Wilmington Chamber, they're members of the North Carolina Chamber. Why do we have that agreement? It's so we have a grassroots network of small businesses across the state. So if there's a bill that needs to be where we need to take action on, we say flip the switch, shut down the switchboard at the General Assembly, have calls coming in, letters, emails, visits. We don't do it very often, but when we need to do it, that's what the grassroots is for. We only did it once or twice in the short session, in the long session, but with great results, where small businesses from around the state, through the local chamber, would call up their legislator, call up the governor's mansion. So that's the Chamber Federation. We also have policy committees made up of our members. This is where our policy, our strategic goals long term turn into priorities for the year. You're going to see our list, what the priorities were going into the 2013 session. That's all developed by our members. So we're a membership-driven, membership-led organization. And then these other wheels, you see Chamber PAC, and Chamber IE, these are the kind of the political arms of the chamber. And my shop is this, this grease that's making the wheel spin, political intelligence. That's what I like to call my office. And, policy is the most important thing, policy above politics. But if you don't understand the politics, you can't get policy done. And so that's what my job is, to try to understand the politics, and with these two other wheels, the PAC and the IE, try to change the politics if we can. PAC gives direct contributions to candidates, endorses candidates, pro-business candidates. And Chamber IE, that stands for Independent Expenditure, that's uncoordinated outside expenditures to help candidates win election. So the idea, these wheels spinning together, it spits out of the other end, hopefully, good solutions to make North Carolina the #1 state for jobs. So any questions on just how we're organized and structured and how we function? No? We have a new person on staff who has a teaching background. He's in education, and he tells me that the average teacher, asks for questions or comments, usually waits only half a second before moving on to the next thing, and it takes about a second and a half to actually form a question in your mind. So I'm going to make sure I pause. He recommends to pause for 7 seconds, which seems like a long time when you're standing up here, but I'm going to pause for 7 seconds. If there are any questions, please feel free. All right, so going on. Yes, there is a question.
Hi, thank you for taking my question.
Sure.
What is your source of information that you pull from in order to generate your policy to advocate? What is your...
Well, that's a good question. So we have these policy committees that are made up of our members. So we have a labor and employment committee, or HR type issues. We have a tax committee. So we have these different committees that have 15 to 20 members that make up cross section of our membership, and so different industries, different parts of the state. These are the ones that are kind of tasked with looking at, okay, what are the pressing issues? What do we need to look at next year? So we've done studies before. We're going to talk about unemployment insurance this morning. That's a good example. So our committee that handles that issue, we paid for a study to really understand the problem we were dealing with and solutions for addressing it. So, if we need to bring in outside help, we do. So we brought in consulting firms like to handle the UI question. That's what our policy committees are for, to understand what we're dealing with and what we need to do to get there. Good question. Anybody else? I'm going to make sure I give you the time this time.
Is this the former NCCBI?
It is. Yeah, the chamber, we changed our name about 6 years ago, I think it is. We were formerly NCCBI. I think that change kind of signaled, we had new leadership that came in. Lou Ebert, he's been the CEO for the last few years, 5 or 6 years. And this is and I've been at the chamber for a year and a half. And the direction we're going is, we like to say, we're trying to be a big boy chamber now. So we're involved in all areas. So long-term thinking, that's the foundation. We've never done that before. And also knowing the political landscape and changing it. We've never done that before. So that's where I come in. And that's what we're doing right now. Questions? Any others? Okay. We're going to move on here to 2013 opportunities. So we mentioned the policy committees. These are the opportunities that we have, the priorities going into the 2013 session of where we're going to spend our time and focus our attention. You can see the list here. Talent and workforce development. Education is always a critically important priority that we look at in the chamber. Our members, we do an annual survey. Education is always one of the top 1 or 2 issues. Modernizing the tax code. We're going to talk a lot about that. Restore solvency, integrity, and affordability of the UI system. That was the other, probably the most pressing priority going into this year. Have a statewide water plan. Ensure adequate support for transportation infrastructure. Keep updating the workers' comp system. Tort reform, regulatory reform, and then all of the above energy strategy. These are our key priorities going into this year. Now, these priorities fall under what we call the 4 pillars. So there's 4 pillars of a secure and growing economy. And these are not in silos. There's different bills that kind of fall into different, more than one pillar. But you can't look at any of these in a vacuum. We need to have a strong education system. We also need a competitive business climate. We also need sound infrastructure. And then finally, a culture of entrepreneurship and innovation. So these 4 pillars kind of guided us this year of the areas to focus on. So as we talk about the wins from this year, I'm going to discuss them as they fall under these 4 pillars. So first, education. There are quite a few bills that passed this session. I'll leave this slide on the screen for you for a while as I talk about it. If you want to talk about specific bills. One, Senate Bill 14 was the first bill that the new governor signed when he came into office. This is a bill to expand access to technical education. So it provides basically stamps on a high school degree if you're college ready, career ready, or college or career ready. And so emphasizing students who want to go into technical fields, or maybe they need to go to community college instead of a 4-year college, or maybe they're ready for career. That's what the degree signifies. And the focus is we need to do a better job as a state with matching up students with available jobs and the jobs of the future. Some of those jobs require 4-year degrees. Some of them require technical degrees. There's a lot of open positions across the state, especially in manufacturing, where more technical degrees are needed when not enough students that have those degrees are coming out. So that's the focus here, making a step towards matching up students with those more technical degrees. There's 2 bills, House Bill 23 and 44, that were designed to increase digital learning in the classroom. So these deal with making digital devices more available and also making sure teachers are equipped to be able to teach using digital devices. So, we're living in a time where the need for a 30-pound textbook for every class is starting to fade away. And so now kids are using laptops, computers, and the internet. The way we teach is changing rapidly. Technology is much more used in the classroom. So that's what these bills do to help students have more access to digital devices, digital learning. Brass to the class and CDL requirements. These are 2 really innovative bills that help our military veterans. So Brass to the Class is designed for military vets to be able to make lateral entry into the teaching profession once they leave the military, to use their experience to move into teaching. This is a great opportunity for teachers, for jobs, and also to bring their experience into the classroom. CDL requirements is the same idea, but for the trucking industry. So basically what this bill does, CDL stands for Commercial Driver's License. The idea of this bill is if you're in the military driving a truck in Afghanistan or Iraq or some other country, you're probably equipped to drive a tractor trailer in North Carolina. So you can use your experience in the military to pass some of the skills tests for driving a truck. Now, we've been told and we think that this could produce up to 4,000 jobs in North Carolina that are unfilled right now for truckers. So it's a great jobs bill. And then finally, the Excellent Public Schools Act. That was not passed as a separate bill. That was rolled into the budget. But quite a few good things in there that were supported by the business community, by the chamber. One is merit pay for teachers. So putting in a system where we pay our best teachers as much money as we can make available for them to reward our best teachers and keep them in our school system. Also, more accountability for our schools. There's now, instead of the previous system, which is kind of a different adjective for different types of schools, you got a performing school, an excellent school, which no parents can really understand what that means. You have to go look it up somewhere. Now it's A through F, and it's very simple to understand. And so the idea is get our C performing schools up to B, get our Bs up to A, make our schools perform better, more accountable. That's the idea. And then last is literacy and emphasizing 3rd grade literacy. So there's a big dividing line for kids who leave the 3rd grade and enter into the 4th grade without being at grade level in reading. They're much more likely to eventually drop out of high school. Kids that can read by the end of the 3rd grade at grade level are very likely to graduate. That's kind of the dividing line. So we want to catch kids, make sure that they can read by the end of the 3rd grade. And so the reforms that are in place, if a child is not reading at grade level by 3rd grade, they repeat the grade, but focus that year, again, taking the year over again, but not as just a repeat, but focusing on reading, making sure by the end of that 2nd year that they're able to read. So any questions? Yes?
What are we doing about teacher salaries?
Well, salaries, that's obviously been a huge issue that's been discussed a lot in the media. There's only been one raise for teachers in the last, I think, 7 years. That occurred 2 years ago, I believe. There was not the money this time to do raises. I'm predicting, you can hold me, write this down as a prediction. I'm betting that there will be a teacher raise next year because it's an election year. But there's just not the money there to do everything we want to do. And the number one reason for that, you've probably heard this all before, is Medicaid. Our Medicaid budget goes over every year. It's the fastest growing area of the budget, and it also goes over budget every year. So just, unexpected hundreds of millions of dollars going to Medicaid. So basically, all the growth of government over the last decade has gone to Medicaid. And until we fix that problem, it's going to be hard to fund education the way we want to because we're dealing with that. But good question. Anybody else any questions on education? I'm going to wait my full 7 seconds. I'd love to hear your input on these bills. Are these things you've heard about? These things that you're aware that they're passing? Good, bad, indifferent? All right, I'm going to go on to business climate pillar. This is where a lot of the highest profile bills that passed this session were, and we're going to go into more in depth on those. So opportunities going in, just as a reminder from that early slide of what our opportunities were, priorities for the year. Tax reform, UI, workers' comp, tort reform, and regulatory reform. And you can see on the screen some of the wins here. We're gonna talk in depth about these first two, but the next one, here at the bottom, regulatory reform. That was kind of the third big win out of what I've called the big three for business. Right at the start of session, one of the big ones passed, UI reform. Towards the end of session, almost at the very end of session, tax reform passed. This is another one that didn't get quite as much press coverage, regulatory reform, but this is another big one for business. And really in any other legislative session, if just one of these types of big, huge, comprehensive bills had passed, it would have been a real accomplishment. But to have three bills like this pass in 1 year was really quite a feat. You can see in progress, there's NC Commerce Protection Act. That's a tort reform bill. So that's the one priority from the list here where we did not really have points on the scoreboard for winning this year. That's in progress, and hopefully that's something we can get done in 2014. Any questions on this before I go into UI and tax? Those are the ones that tend to bring out the most discussion. So let's go to tax reform first. So first of all, why did we need to do tax reform? North Carolina has a Depression-era tax code. Hasn't been significantly changed since the 1930s, and we had grown uncompetitive over time. We had fallen to 44th out of 50 in terms of tax competitiveness for business. And we're being told by our members, and we did a tax tour before last year. We started in November, December, wrapped it up in January. We went to 13 local chambers, just talked to local chamber members that weren't associated with the North Carolina Chamber. We wanted to hear from small business What we heard over and over again was that rates were uncompetitive, that we needed to simplify. And one thing we heard over and over again, it's good that you're doing this healthcare meeting coming up. The one thing we kept hearing about is, what is the Affordable Care Act going to do to me? There's so much uncertainty, so much that's just floating out there that businesses don't know how to deal with. We need some certainty with the tax code. We need some help, and we need some relief so we can deal with these other things like the Affordable Care Act. And so there's a big need. I think everybody agreed that there was a need to do tax reform. Then, of course, everybody has a different idea of what the solution is. Well, what we ended up doing, the solution that was finally passed, moves us from 44th to 17th. Significant reduction in personal rates, which is a big help to small business. You know, most small businesses file personal income taxes, not corporate. There's also a big drop in the corporate, and over time it can step down even further, just assuming that we meet our revenue targets for the state. The state budget is not going to shrink. There's going to be more revenue the next year than there was this year, projected, and then more the next year after that. So the government will still grow as we accommodate more people moving to the state, but the rate of growth will slow down. So this is a big help to businesses in all sectors and industries. There's still that was a lot that was left on the table. Probably the biggest miss, or one feature that we as the chamber wanted to see addressed, was the franchise tax, and that's something we're going to focus on next year. So the franchise tax is not the McDonald's or Pizza Hut tax. This is a tax on assets and property that businesses of all sizes pay. And you pay it before you make a single dollar earned for the year. You pay it regardless of whether you earn a profit or not. And our franchise tax is one feature that makes us more uncompetitive with other states. If we had knocked out the franchise tax, and then an earlier version of tax reform did knock out the franchise tax, we would have moved to 6th as opposed to 17th. That's one area that we want to focus on next year. So, any questions on tax reform? This is the biggest from the year. Yes?
What's the Chamber's position going forward on the sales tax refund cap? Are y'all interested in lobbying to eliminate that, or at least keep it at 45 million or higher?
We did not lobby or push the cap. So there was an earlier version. What's that?
Did you fight it?
Yes. I mean, we talked. That was one of the issues we endorsed an earlier version of tax reform that had a lower cap, and we endorsed it, because it was a zero corporate tax, a zero franchise tax, a lower personal tax, and it would have made us extremely competitive. The one area that we had heartburn about was the cap, and so we talked about that, and it ultimately ended up at 45 million. So there's nonprofits across the state that get the sales tax refund. The largest 1 or 2 hospitals in the state are right at the cap or right above the cap. So it doesn't affect any other nonprofits besides 1, possibly 2 hospitals.
Right, but if you're going to continue to try to lower your overall tax rate, it's going to end up, that cap's got to come down for the finances to work. And so I'm just curious to know, is your chamber going to support your largest employer, just about every community in the state?
Yeah, we are going to support the largest employers. There was a lot of press about some hospitals leaving the chamber, making a big deal about that. We try not to fight, get into a public fight with anyone. We have good hospital members of the chamber, probably less than most people realize. I mean, it's one sector of the economy, and it's one part of our membership. But it's up to the legislators to figure out how to fund government and what level that needs to be. Our job is to fight for our members and making the state more competitive from a business standpoint, to attract more employers and more employees. So we're going to do that. We're not pushing for the cap to be lowered. There are other ways to make sure that the revenue numbers targets are met. Mm-hmm.
Scott's asking the real question, though, is where revenue is going to come from in the future for the state. And I work with a lot of your colleagues in the building a lot, and people need to understand that but for the chamber, we would have a whole lot different looking tax code right now that, in my mind, would be very anti-business, and this gets to where the revenues come from. One little thing we did, actually, Dean Miller was involved in this back in the 80s. We got rid of the inventory tax and the intangibles tax, which then put more pressure on sales tax and personal income tax from the government. So we've met the enemy, and it is us, okay? And what some of us worry about is, are we doing this to ourselves again? The Chamber has been unbelievably forceful in saying we don't need to unwind all 320 special provisions in the code that exist to encourage economic development in the state. And that flat tax is nice in Atlas Shrugged, but I don't know that it works in real life. And I'm really just interested, because I think y'all did a hell of a job last year, in what are you going to do this year? Because there'll be, Rootonomics will come back.
Yeah.
Yet the House says we've got to be prudent about this, because if you have overall strange, I have to get rid of your program if you're going to go to a true flat tax thing. Where's the Chamber going? I'm assuming you're going to be in the same sort of place you were.
Yeah, that's a great question. So for those that don't know, Rootonomics, that refers to Bob Rucho, who was kind of the force of nature behind tax reform for a lot of last year. He came out with a plan that was, his plan was a zero income tax, a zero corporate tax, and basically move almost totally to a consumption tax, a sales tax. We didn't endorse that plan because there was a lot of uncertainty with how that was going to work. A lot of questions for business-to-business transactions, how that was going to work. And so we did not endorse what we call the Rucho plan. We also didn't endorse when the House came out, virtually the same time with their plan, for the simple reason it didn't simplify the code at all. There was no real changes in simplifying the structure. And also, it was a tax increase on business. So a lot of people don't realize that. That was a tax increase on our members. So we didn't endorse that plan either. We did endorse the plan where the compromise that ultimately ended up here with being a compromise. It's not the Rucho plan. It's not the huge shock to the system that we are worried about, and a lot of you and our members are worried about. But it also wasn't something that is just not really tax reform, and it is in fact a tax increase in disguise. That is going to be a challenge. Rootonomics is going to come back. Bob Rucho has already said they want to look at this again in 2015. It's not a short session issue, but it will come up next time, wanting to move to that same goal again of zeroing out income tax. We're not there with that. I mean, we are very clear with him, and we worked with him to try to make the plan better, and ultimately we never endorsed it. We did endorse the plan that moved us from 44th to 6th with all these other great features, and we ended up with a pretty good plan.
I might add an incredible leadership risk to your organization, because y'all took a lot of heat on that. And those of us out here who are not crazy very much appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate it. Yeah, it was. We did take a lot of heat, but this is a huge issue, and not everybody's. There's a reason why this hasn't been done in decades, despite a lot of people trying. So we're on the right track. This is a much better position for the state, and hopefully, tax reform is something that should continue over time. It's not a destination, it's a journey. There are still things we can do to make the tax code simpler, like addressing the franchise tax, and that's what we're going to be fighting for. Any other questions on tax reform?
What about conversations related to incentives, specifically the film incentives?
Yeah, incentives. So that is what ultimately took the brunt of tax reform, and what we were told after the fact is there was a direct trade-off with incentives and the sales tax refund. If setting the cap at $45 million allowed them to save the R&D tax credit, which was very important to innovation, keeping those innovators in the state, but they were not able to keep the Article 3J credits, and a lot of credits are expiring over beginning of next year and the year after, because the rates are still where they are, and the tax credits are expiring. That's one area where we're going to be focusing on. The film. Well, so it was basically it's a money trade-off. If that sales tax refund cap had been lower, this is what we were told later. If it had been lower, then more of the credits would have been saved. Article 3J would have been saved. Again, that's not our job to find the money, but we are going to fight for the members. Those Article 3J credits are really important. They're not just for big businesses. Those are for small businesses across the state. There's a lot of very small, under 10 employee businesses that take Article 3J credits. The film credits wasn't addressed in tax reform. Those are still, as of now, slated to expire. I think you guys know this better than I do, but it's, I think, 2 years now. 2014. Yeah. So that's still on the chopping block now, unless something changes.
What kind of number goes with elimination of sales tax?
It's a pretty small number. The retail merchants really wanted to keep that, but the trade-off there is a much lower rate. But it is a pretty small number. We're talking about a few tens of millions of dollars, not $100 million, and that let them lower the rates more. So the big feature, the personal income tax goes from 6, 7, and 7.75 rates, and you get to 7.75 pretty quickly. I think it's $60,000. You're already at the top rate. So the new plan is under the lowest rate. It's at 5.8 the first year, 5.75 after that. So it's under the lowest rate, and also it's a bigger standard deduction. So this is it's more take-home pay at every income level. Any other questions on tax? Yeah, this is there are many times in this process where we thought that tax reform was probably going to die, but somehow managed to keep resurrecting itself, and ended up being a very, very, very good for employers across the state, which is good for North Carolina. Next is UI reform. And you remember we're dealing with this government shutdown right now, and another showdown crisis again. Remember last year the crisis was the fiscal cliff, and going over the fiscal cliff. UI, unemployment insurance, was North Carolina's fiscal cliff. A lot of people didn't realize that we had racked up almost $3 billion in debt to the federal government to pay for unemployment insurance benefits. The legislature found out about this, I guess this was probably 2010, that we had basically taken out the previous administration and taken out loans to cover unemployment insurance, and the bills were coming due. With this debt, the government, as our loan shark, the federal government, was going to require mandatory tax increases every year on every employee that is employed in the state until the debt was paid off. So it's a $21 per employee tax increase yearly until the debt was paid off. And there was really no end in sight of when that would ever happen. 2019 was the estimate. I heard another one just the other day that the estimate was revised up to 2020, but we were still running a deficit. There was really no end in sight of when that would ever be paid off. Our debt was the third highest in the country, right after California and New York. So not the company you want to be with. And on a per employee or per capita basis, we were the second highest in the country behind Nevada. So we were in very bad shape. And not only was it broke, but the system was broken. We had the worst managed UI system in the country over 15 years. Any kind of audit that shows the accountability of the program, we would come up failing. There were checks going out to people in prison. WREL did a report on that. Central Prison, there were people getting unemployment insurance checks. So just a totally broken system that needed to be fixed. And so UI reform does that. It makes it solvent again, allows us to avoid those mandatory tax increases on employers. Now, keep in mind, employers pay UI taxes. The state administers the program. So only employers pay these taxes, not individuals. And the state had basically mismanaged this to the point where it was just totally insolvent. So the fix is now, we're going to pay this debt off faster. Employers are getting a tax increase this year, and that's part of the deal. There's pain to go around for everybody, but there's not these mandatory federal increases every year to pay it off. The most important part is getting the system refocused on reemployment. So it had become basically another entitlement program where people were staying on unemployment, not finding jobs, and that's not a service to them. You know, the system is supposed to be there to help them find jobs and get back to work, and that's what the focus is going to be. We've already made a lot of progress. The debt's coming down more quickly than they even imagined. We should be able to have this paid off by 2016, so it's very positive. Any questions on UI? I like to point out this graph here. This shows, this is revenues coming in, taxes paid. This is benefits going out. You can see where the problem occurred. A huge gap there. But fortunately, that debt's coming down. All right, I'm going on to the next pillar, which is entrepreneurship and innovation. I will admit this is probably the area that we're weakest right now as the state chamber, but it's an area that the state really needs to focus some energy on. We just need to have more businesses that are starting here. You know, the business climate, that kind of addresses businesses leaving or businesses wanting to move here. Entrepreneurship and innovation, this really addresses creating new businesses from the ground floor here. You know, we want to attract Fortune 500 companies to North Carolina and all the small businesses that support large companies. But even to really build a sustainable, secure economy, we want the next Fortune 500 company to be started in North Carolina and to grow here over time. So that's what entrepreneurship and innovation is all about. There's a couple bills that are in progress that we're going to be pushing next year. The New Markets Job Act is basically a bill to attract private capital to underserved parts of the state, rural counties especially, but also just economically distressed counties. It's private dollars, private capital. The state government, their balance sheet is only affected if after 7 years the company stays and hits their employment targets. So if they promise they're going to create 50 jobs, at the end of the 7 years, if there's still 50 jobs here, only then would they be able to take a tax credit. So it's a good pro-business, pro-growth bill, especially for this critical area of attracting capital, which is, you know, is tied up in knots right now with just our economy and since the financial crisis. So that's a good one. Crowdfunding is another one that passed the House this year. Basically, the idea here is just to lower the regulations and requirements on people pooling their money together to invest in startup companies. So it allows people to use their money to invest, to pool it together with other people. That's why it's called crowdfunding. So some good ideas. And the Domestic Energy Jobs Act, one that did pass, is just continuing the process to explore energy exploration, hydraulic fracturing or fracking, and to just set up the regulatory environment to handle that once the industry or once the companies that are going to be doing that display that they can do it in an environmentally safe way. Yes.
The chamber here, the Wilmington Chamber, and through its initiative Take Your Teacher, had a real emphasis on entrepreneurship, and the university has recently had its grand opening for the Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. One thing that I hear from that community regularly is the need to restore the qualified business venture tax. Is that, and so it really ties back to tax and to the Is there any possibility of that?
That's not something that I'm aware of, but that we are actively seeking ideas from folks, especially from economic development folks and from folks that are involved with the university system. That's a great fertile area. We put in a lot of money and have a great university system, one of the best, if not the best in the country. But where we don't measure up very well is the amount of effort we put into innovation with our universities versus the commercial businesses that come out of it. There's a lot of great ideas that come out of our universities, but we have a hard time turning those into commercial businesses. Other states do a very good job of this. Texas, California, even with California's, they have a lot of things that are wrong with California. One thing that they do very well is setting up a culture of entrepreneurship and innovation, and that's something that we need to take away. So why don't we talk afterwards, and I can bring that idea back. Any other questions? All right, and the last pillar here is infrastructure and growth leadership. A lot of people ask me, why is it called growth leadership? I mentioned at the beginning that North Carolina is going to be the 7th largest state in America by 2030. We have millions of new people, a lot of them moving here without even a job. That's one reason why our unemployment rate is still so high. People are moving here in spite of our problems economically. They just want to be in this state. We have so much to offer, and having the infrastructure to handle that capacity is a big challenge, and funding is the real problem. House Bill 817 was designed to address part of that equation. So this changes in how we prioritize road projects. It doesn't change the size of the pie very much, but it changes how we distribute the money within the pie. And the projection is that just by and how we reprioritize and give money to the most necessary and projects that make the best business case to go forward, that we're going to have over 30% more projects over the next decade, and this could employ thousands of new people, not only in construction, but in the industries that support that. So this is a big transportation reform, probably the biggest transportation reform that has passed in the last 20 years. This is just the first step, though. The other big challenge is how do you keep the pie from shrinking? So transportation is almost fully funded by the gas tax, and the gas tax revenues continue to decrease because cars get better and better gas mileage. They're still using the roads, but they're paying less in gas mileage. So one idea that came out of that, the fair share contribution for electric vehicles that was passed in the budget, that's basically just a $50 fee for electric vehicles. That doesn't even cover their gas tax, and it's a very small step. But these are the kind of ideas that we've got to look at to make sure that pie doesn't continue to shrink. Tolling is obviously a big issue, especially in the eastern part of the state with I-95. The chamber is not supporting tolling on 95, but we do have to remain open to different options. So tolling for new roads or projects that are being built, or new lanes. 540 around Raleigh, that project was able to be expedited because they made part of it a toll road. In Charlotte, I-77, they're going to do what's called hot lanes, which is not the same as an HOV lane. We have more than one person in the car. A hot lane is where you're driving down the road, driving down 77 in Charlotte. There's a traffic jam. You hop over into this express lane and pay a toll to get into the fast lane. That's the idea behind it. So the price will go up as traffic goes up. So if you're sitting in bumper-to-bumper traffic, it'll cost more to get into the hot lane. But these are the kind of ideas that we need to think about, because transportation funding is one of the biggest challenges we face right now. So any questions on that? I'm going to talk about the other aspects of infrastructure too, but any questions on transportation? Yeah.
When Senate Bill 710, was the $50 fee point of sale, or was it actually per registration each year?
Per registration each year, yeah. Yes?
In discussions about infrastructure, is there ever a conversation about water and sewer? I know that's always an impediment in this region.
Absolutely, yeah. That's the other aspect there. Protect North Carolina's water supply. There's not really a statewide water plan right now, and years like this where we've had a lot of rain, we tend not to think about it. Where there's no water shortage right now. But what we don't want is to be in the situation that Atlanta is in, where they have more people than they can handle with the water supply that they have. And so, yeah, water, sewer, that's a big aspect of economic development. And there were some water bills that passed this year, some that were in reg reform also. And the track that we need to be on is to have a statewide water plan so that we can capture water when we have a lot of rain, and prepare for the next drought, which we know will happen. There were some good bills that addressed that. The interbasin transfer law was one, and like I said, there's others that were in the regulatory reform bill to allow us to make better common sense decisions with how we treat water. Yeah.
Does the chamber have a position on the cap of the gas tax?
Yeah, we are against lowering the cap on the gas tax. So there was a bill that was introduced this year that would have cut the gas tax and capped it at a lower rate. We opposed that. Now, it was capped in the budget, but it was capped at a level that, and we understand why they do it. That's if you poll, and we have polled this question, the most unpopular tax by far that people pay is the gas tax. Property tax is up there too, but the gas tax is the most unpopular tax, and that's because every time you fill up your car, you're paying 30 cents or whatever, 37 cents on that's just going to taxes, and we have a high gas tax. The reason is we have more state roads than any other state in America, and we have no local roads. The state maintains all the roads, and so we opposed cutting the gas tax in the budget. It is capped, but it's capped at a level where it's probably not going to. It was probably not going to go over that level anyway in the next 2 years. So it was capped at a level that I think we can handle. Good question.
The funds utilized with that highway fund, it seems to be the go-to fund for other initiatives, not from the road system. It's also being used to keep it to what its intended purposes. Absolutely, and that's one bill that passed this year. Limit the use of the highway trust fund balance. It limits the use to only road-related projects. So basically protecting further the highway trust fund to make sure that the dollars are being spent on roads. That has happened a lot in the past, where the transportation trust fund was rated to pay for other things. That practice is going to stop. Yeah.
One of your previous slides alluded to supporting our energy plan, but it didn't go into detail. And here you have protecting our water supply. Mm-hmm. Where does the chamber stand on fracking?
Well, we support looking at the regulations to allow fracking in the future, but only if the environmental requirements are met. Only if it's demonstrated by the companies who want to do it that it's safe, it's not going to damage the water supply. That's the only circumstance where we support fracking. And so, fracking is still not allowed in North Carolina. The regulations are in place now to look at allowing it in the future. That's what we've been supportive of so far. And as long as the environmental requirements are met, then we'll continue down that track. But if they're not met, then fracking won't be allowed. But we are supportive of energy exploration, but not at the cost of environmental damage. Yeah. Any other questions? This is my last slide, so if I need to go back to anything, if we want to revisit, anything else, tax reform. So looking ahead to next year, I mentioned the franchise tax is going to be a big priority. Education is always going to be one of our top priorities, and workforce development. Yes?
Does the chamber have a position on mortgage interest deductions in the state?
No.
Not having a mortgage interest deduction?
No, we didn't have a position on that either. I know that the Realtors Association, was very adamant about that, and I understand that. But we didn't have, we don't have very many realtors as members, but we didn't take a position on it, capping it or not. One thing just to point out in the tax reform, there's a cap now, a mortgage interest deduction, $25,000 in interest is the cap on mortgage interest. And so what that translates to, and they, the same with the sales tax refund, they played with the number going up or down, and they ultimately ended up at $25,000. That basically means, depending on your interest rate, if you're in a mortgage of about probably more than $400,000 mortgage, then you'll go over the cap. If your mortgage is less than $400,000, you're probably under the cap. And the trade-off is, and I like to say this on everything involving tax reform, you can't look at any one tax in a vacuum. You got to look at the whole system. So even though there's a cap on the mortgage interest deduction, there's a big drop in your personal interest rate or your personal tax rate. So that's good for everybody, and it's also good for realtors. So they have more take-home pay. So I think that the housing industry is going to be okay with this. It's not the lower cap that they were looking at earlier. Any other questions? Yeah.
I do a lot of economic development, and one thing corporations are mostly concerned to me about is local property tax. Most corporations I work with don't pay much, if any, state income tax. But if we continue to focus on the tax approach that we have, that Richonomics does, we're just going to push back to the counties the cost, and they're already seeing that you're pushing expenses back to them. There were several proposals this year which pushed even more back to them. Where's the chamber? I mean, the other one's the university system. It's real simple to change the dials and run the cost of a university education up 15 or 20%. But that's also an economic development tool to us. When we're recruiting somebody, I can give you a better deal than any of my competitors at a good quality institution like UNCW. So, that's all part of, like you say, the dial, the dashboard.
Yeah.
Where's the chamber will come out on? I'm particularly interested in my county folks, that you're not downloading stuff to them that they can't handle.
Yeah, I mean that was one of our concerns with the Rucho plan, was that it was basically it could have been shifting state taxes down to the county, increased property taxes. Where we ended up, I think the counties and municipalities are mostly held harmless, unaffected by it, and that's obviously a big selling point, is our property taxes are a lot better than especially South Carolina. I mean, that's one area where we're much more competitive than South Carolina. So we'll definitely want to stay. We don't want to be an outlier in any one area, and so that's a good thing. South Carolina is an outlier in that one area of property taxes, and we don't want to go down that road.
My point to it is it's a risk, and folks around this table need to communicate with their senators and House members to be particularly sensitive that we're not trading off one problem, one area, to just shift it to another area. Because a corporation, they all have to pay the property tax. I mean, unless you're incenting them to come, there's no real relief in that particular area, and so that hits everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one area. I'm going to keep going back to the franchise tax. So that's a separate property tax. So businesses pay your local property tax. They also pay the statewide property tax, the franchise. And the way that they do it, if you're a small business, you know how this is done. I mean, you basically have to calculate it in 3 different ways based on assets, stock. There's another calculation, and you take the largest of those 3 calculations and pay that one. So it's not only is it pretty steep for businesses, and you got to pay it before you make a single dime, it's also very hard to comply with and takes a lot of effort to comply with, which is another cost. So that's one area that we want to focus on. But yeah, that's a good point about property taxes. I was starting to mention some of the other priorities next year. Education, I mentioned my prediction again that there will be a salary pay increase for teachers. I think that'll happen. And obviously Medicare and Medicaid and just health care in general is going to continue to be probably the most pressing issue that we have, not just as a state, but just as a country. And so I think that's probably going to nudge out things like UI as kind of the nagging thing that's been in the background that's now turning into a more pressing issue. So figuring out how to keep health costs down for payers, for employers who want to employ people and give them insurance as a benefit, and also for their employees who are having to pay for hospital and doctor visits. Keeping our healthcare costs under control, that's going to be a big priority for the future, not just next session, but just ongoing. Yes?
We're also hearing there's going to be more reg reform next year.
Yeah, I mean, they kind of call this past Reg Reform 3. They've done it the last 3 sessions. There will be Reg Reform 4. I mean, I think every year, that's one of those issues. Also, workers' comp and tort, where you just have to keep going back every year and looking at it. Workers' comp, they passed a big workers' comp reform bill in 2011. A lot of those reforms that they made haven't been implemented yet, and so there was a bill that was passed this year to make force the Industrial Commission to start implementing the reforms that they already passed. So workers' comp, reg reform, tort, those are issues that we need to keep going back to every year to make sure that we're not uncompetitive with other states in any given area. Yeah.
Two questions. One has to do with tort reform. What is the Chamber's position on the loser pays initiative with that? And then number 2, what about with the state lottery? What is your position in terms of keeping all the funding generated by the lottery totally to school construction and not going outside like, for example, like the state of Tennessee. Mm-hmm. They had a bill that said that's all that can be used. The state government cannot go in and tap that resource or any other funding source.
Yeah, I have to plead the fifth on that. I'm not sure if we've ever had a position on that, but I mean, it fits with our principles, and we want to make sure that education is funded at the right level where it should be. And our big push also with the limited dollars that we have is make sure that the education system is accountable and make sure that we have the best teachers and they're teaching the right things. So, but I can't say on the lottery if we've ever weighed in on that or not. But I imagine that we'd be supportive of that. Sorry, what was your first question?
Tort reform. How do you do the loser pays?
Yeah.
Help minimize the frivolous lawsuits that are brought against employers and others.
Yeah, we're in favor of that. I mean, the tort reform bill that's in process right now, there's a lot of different components to it, and there's probably going to be more added on next year since it didn't pass this year. But some of the components of it are ending lawsuit lending. So this is basically, you know what a loan shark is. This is loan sharks for people who are filing lawsuits, and they take a huge portion, if not all, of the settlement, and it just encourages more litigation, more cost for business, and it's not good for people that are genuinely hurt, because they basically have to turn over their check to their loan shark. So that's one aspect of it. There's also some more transparency and accountability for the Attorney General. So right now, the Attorney General can enter into a private contract with a law firm, to handle some kind of, class action suit or what have you. None of that has to be disclosed or anything. So this bill, part of tort reform was that, the Attorney General has to disclose that, the amount, which law firm he's paying for. And the reason that's a problem is we've seen this in other states, some states with really bad legal climates, especially like Mississippi and West Virginia, where the Attorney General will enter into a $50 million contract with a law firm, not disclose it to anybody, and then as soon as he's out of office, he goes and works for that firm that he just handed the big contract to. So it's just a good government bill. There's some other issues there. You probably heard one piece that was really sensationalized is called Ag Gag, the Ag Gag bill. That's what this tort reform is, but it's really not. It's an employment fraud piece. So it basically outlaws people going and lying on a job application with the intention of just going in and uncovering. And it's not just the video cameras, that's the part that you hear about, but it's other things too. It's stealing intellectual property or just stealing merchandise. So that's a good provision that we want to get through. And then just, like you said, loser pays, and just making sure that we have a less litigious environment is very key. The U.S. Chamber produces a list every year of the best and worst legal climate. Delaware is always number one. They have been for at least 10 years in a row. North Carolina is kind of middle of the pack, but we used to be better. You know, we've kind of fallen a little bit as other states have done tort reform. So we need to make sure that we're not becoming uncompetitive there. Any other questions?
What about keeping the right to work state initiative?
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of effort and initiative now, especially with the impetus coming down from the administration for collective bargaining, and to put that into the Constitution so that we would not allow collective bargaining for government employees and so forth.
Yeah, we are 100% behind maintaining our right to work status. We're the least unionized state in America, and that is a badge of honor.
Development and
yeah.
Economic development.
Absolutely. So yeah, we are 100% behind maintaining our right to work status. There's other states, you know, that it's either a lot of states have it in statute like we do. Some states have it in their constitution. There was talk about, you know, North Carolina needing putting it in the Constitution. There's only one or two other states, I think there's two now because Alabama did it, that have it in statute and in the Constitution. Alabama is kind of, you know, in a contest with us to be the least unionized state. We're number one and they're number two. So that's what their goal is. But there really is undercurrents and underground work going on. I just saw an article the other day from a national newspaper about the AFL-CIO trying to organize the South, a Southern strategy they called it.
It is the number one strategy.
Yep, and the states that they mentioned as their top priorities were Texas, Florida, and North Carolina, the big southern states. And so that's an area we got to remain vigilant on. Any other questions?
You know, getting back to economic development, you and I touched upon this briefly. And Connie and Al heard me say this before. There's a lot of initiative, a lot of effort appears to be on the surface for economic development. I mean, that's the buzzwords coming down from the federal government, the buzzwords coming down from our state, and I'm glad to see the many things that were done by our governor and legislature. And there's locally, there's many economic initiatives. The Chamber has one and others. I belong to a coalition of economic development. And it's sort of like being from the aviation business, kind of like a jet team. And when the jet team takes off and they fly in formation and they take off, and that's the direction of economic development. But as they go out, they separate. And it seems to me, and a wondering question to you is, how can we harness all of this locally and statewide to bring all this initiative together for the common good of the state, the common good of the country? You know, I don't have the answer to that, but you know, there's an awful, I'm assuming there's a lot of that same thing going on in all the other counties and, you know, across the state. Mm-hmm. And so we need to harness that. And I'm just wondering if the State Chamber of Commerce is taking a leadership role in that, to harness that activity, that interest, and for the common good of what we need to do here, helping you with your 4 pillars and with the state legislature doing the right thing for the whole common good of the economic development.
Yeah, I think the best, that's a great question, and I can't claim to know the answer to that fully, but I think probably the best thing we can do from the start is if we're all working together on the same playbook. If there's a unified business community, not just the state chamber, but the local chambers, our members, your members, if we're kind of repeating the same refrain about having a long-term strategy, this Vision 2030 with these 4 pillars, you know, there's individual projects and strategies and ideas that can fall under those pillars in different parts of the state. But if we're pushing that same blueprint, I think that the folks that are the elected leaders will pick that up. And that's the reason why we have that. I mean, politicians they come and go. You know, after Governor McCrory leaves, you know, in 3 or 8 years, you know, then we're still going to be here, and we still have to keep the state moving forward. And I think having a long-term plan based around these 4 pillars is great. If we're all speaking the same language, we're all bought into the same overall vision, I think that's really the key foundation for that.
How does your plan fit into the federal, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce initiative?
I mean, you know, we're autonomous from them. We use them as a resource, and they use us as a resource, and to find out what's going on here, and for us to find out what's going on more federally. But I mean, they're basic. I don't envy the position that the U.S. Chamber or anybody working in D.C. is in. I mean, it's gridlock, and I'm glad I'm in North Carolina, where we can get things done and really move the ball down the field. But we do work with them. They asked us for input on immigration. We mostly kind of stayed out of that fight because we were working there's an immigration bill here that passed, and also this is one of those areas where political intelligence comes in. The politics of immigration are unsettled at best. So we mostly have stayed out of that. But there are other things that the U.S. Chamber does on trade agreements, international trade, that we've been supportive of.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me.
I think you'll notice Scott has been doing a